Welcome back. You're still watching Good Morning Namibia. Now, in recent years, the west of the African continent has seen a constant occurrence of what one may term, unconstitutional changes of government through coups. In the past 3 years alone, the western part of the continent has seen approximately 10 coups in that part of the continent, with a fair share of them being successful, therefore overthrowing democratically elected governments. The latest is the takeover in Niger, led by soldiers belonging to the Presidential Guard, adding these strings of coups on the continent. As a result of this, the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, threatened to authorize the use of forces on Niger if the coup leaders did not restore Mohamed Bazoum's presidency, while the African Union had issued a 15-day ultimatum to the coup leaders in Niger to reinstall the country's democratically elected government. However, the deadline to reinstate Bazoum lapsed on Sunday, the 6th of August 2023, and the coup leaders have reportedly closed the country's airspace since. For more insight on the issue of coups in Western Africa and the latest development on the coup in Niger, Associate Professor of African Politics at UNISA, Professor Evaristo Benyera, now joins us virtually all the way from Pretoria. A very good morning, Professor. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
How are you doing, and how is the weather in South Africa?
It's freezing cold. We are supposed to be in August, but in terms of the weather, we are still in the middle of June. Maybe these are some of the effects of climate change.
Well, most definitely. I spoke earlier on coups. Perhaps if you could just enlighten us on what are some of the known issues that lead to or build up to these coups that occur in these different parts of the continent.
Thank you very much once again. I think what we are seeing consolidating in West Africa is a very complicated phenomenon, which is indicative of a deeper structural problem, not only in West Africa, but in the entirety of what we term the post-colony, which includes Africa. The basic problem in Niger and other parts of West Africa, such as Mali, Burkina Faso, Chad, is the absence of the democratic dividend, the absence of the independence dividend. These countries got independence as way back as 1960. So it's almost 50 years plus. Yet the lived experience of the majority of the population is getting worse. So people are getting poorer under their own governments, and democracy seems not to be working. And people are asking the questions, how come we have democracy but no food? And in response to this, the military is always seen as an option. Whilst I do not condone unconstitutional changes in government, what we are tending to see is something that we can call emancipatory military coups or liberatory military coups. By this I mean coups that tend to liberate people from their own errant cities, from their own errant leadership. President Bazoum has been accused of being cause with the West, especially France and the United States, at the expense of the lives of his own people. Right now, we see Niger having some of the poorest living conditions, despite the fact that it is rich in a lot of minerals, such as uranium, which is something that I hope we will discuss in this interview. But allow me to historicize a little bit again as a way of building up the context to what is happening in the Sahel region. France invited its former colonies to a conference in 1958 under the leadership of General Charles de Gaulle. It is as a result of this peace initiative or this independence conference that West African states were literally handed their independence by France. But don't read this as an act of benevolence and you're trying to avoid bloodshed. In fact, it was a preemptive and survivalist strategy by France in order to perpetuate what Kwame Nkrumah termed neo-colonialism. Because these countries were given their independence minus 4 aspects, which to me are the most important aspects of any country. So France retained their financial control, their financial independence. Hence, these countries use the CFA franc. Their money is controlled in Paris. Number 2, their natural resources are controlled in Paris. Number 3, their military is controlled in Paris. And number 4, their international relations is controlled in Paris. Now you tell me, what is an independent country that does not control its finances, its army, its natural resources, and its international relations? So devoid of real independence, this was bound to happen. And the biggest loser here is going to be France. In my own analysis, without the resources of West African states, France will become a poor third world country. This is why France is so desperate to retain control of its former colonies.
All right. Professor, do you think it's perhaps time to look at removing the army from political affairs? And is this something that can be done?
Thank you very much for that kind of thinking. Is it time to remove the army in politics, or is it time to formalize the participation of the army in politics? Yeah. I am always of the view that a sword has got 2 sides. So let's look at both sides. Look at Cote d'Ivoire. The president there, Alassane Ouattara, got in through the support of the West because he was working in Washington. He has perpetuated, in my view, a coup on the people of Cote d'Ivoire by extending his term of office to the 3rd term. A lot of West African leaders, and in fact, one of the biggest political diseases in Africa is the politics of long incumbents. Look at Cameroon and Paul Biya. He has been in power for over 40 years. And these geriatric leaders are underwritten and supported by France and the West as long as they protect French interests. So we have leaders who perpetuate coups on their own people by extending their terms of office. If ECOWAS and the African Union and the United States are interested in genuine democracy and averting unconstitutional changes in leadership, they must first address those African leaders who manipulate and massage the constitution so that they remain forever in power. Then we can talk about the result of their action, one of which is military coups. In my view, the post-colony in Africa deserves a different model of statecraft, one which is not borrowed from the West or dictated by the West, because the West is part of the problem, if not the actual problem in Africa. How about we rethink the reconstitution of the state and add, not complicate or compete, but add traditional leaders? What is the actual role of traditional leaders in African statecraft? They have been sidelined during colonialism. Today, they play a peripheral ceremonial role. Look at very strong leaders like King Mandume Ndemfayo. His people are on the Namibian side, on the Angolan side, and they are not formally represented in the state. The ministers go there in their individual capacity. So all I'm teasing out is that instead of looking at alternative within a problematic paradigm, why don't we look for alternatives to that problematic paradigm? The the post-colony in Africa needs to be rethought. If I may just throw out some of the problems that we are facing. We have tried the monarchy in Eswatini. It proved to be problematic. We have tried the military in Egypt and in West Africa. It proved to be problematic. We tried the constitution in South Africa and Botswana. Here in South Africa, we are suffering from what they are terming state capture. We tried the family as an instrument of managing the state in Togo through the Ayadema family. Look at Togo today. We have tried many forms of governments in Africa, including the clan-based politics in Somalia. Again, we are here. In Ethiopia, there is ethnic federalism. Look at the Tigray region today. So the fundamental question is, what is the best mode for managing politics in the post-colony in Africa? Let's invest our intellect. Let's invest our time in solving that question, instead of saying, let's kick the army out of politics and let's bring the traditional leaders. I think we need more time, maybe a conference, maybe something to tease out the nuances of this omnipresent problem in Africa.
All right. Professor, we have coups that happened in different parts of the continent, including Burkina Faso, Guinea, Mali, Chad, and they all have a common denominator, and this is that they are all countries that were former colonies of the French. In your opinion, why is there so much anti-French sentiments amongst the Francophone states in Western Africa?
The short answer to that question is that there is so much resentment of France in its former colonies because France is living off the resources, predominantly off the resources of its colonies. Yet, when people from Africa try to access and live in France, they are treated as third-class citizens. Yet France is what it is today because of the resources that it continues to loot from its former colonies. This is what builds up that resentment. This is why France is facing this backlash. But allow me also to bring in another angle, which is the availability of the Russian alternative. Today, the Wagner Group is very active in underwriting and protecting African states that previously relied on French protection. The biggest problem in the Sahel region is that of the militants. Other people believe that those militants can be traced to some Western actors who created them and planted them in that region so as to justify their military presence, so as to justify their assistance to the Sahel region. But that is a debatable observation. So France is not having a good vibe, so to speak, because it has presented itself as a continued oppressor and colonizer of its former colonies. Today, the uranium that is used in France, almost 10 to 15% of it comes from Niger, yet it accounts for less than 1% of Niger's budget. What does that mean? It means an asymmetrical power relation where the uranium is bought almost for a very low price, yet it is sustaining French industries, French lives at the expense of those in Africa where those resources are coming from. So this is what is fueling this anti-French sentiment in West Africa.
All right. But when the French president took office, he promised to restore relationships with African governments. Can we say that this promise has failed to bear its fruits?
What does he mean by relationships? He means colonial relationships, not reciprocity, but what he meant was that he will make sure that French interest is protected at whatever cost in West Africa, as we saw in Cote d'Ivoire when when Laurent Gbagbo was removed from power and was even incarcerated in The Hague at the International Criminal Court. So without, and I underline this fact, without African resources, without the mineral wealth and other resources, including the money from its former colonies, France is a doomed economy. This is why France even imposed a colonial tax on its 14 of its former colonies for granting them independence. So this is the cruelty of French colonialism that we are witnessing here. And in a way, Africa is now awakening to the need for real independence. Yes, we have got political independence, but economic independence is even more fundamental, and epistemic and cognitive independence is even better. So Africans are fighting back. They are saying, we are tired of neo-colonialism, we are tired of coloniality, we demand actual independence. And ironically, this is the same mantra that is being pushed by the economic freedom fighters, not only in South Africa, but across Africa, where it is increasingly opening up branches. So for me, there is this intergenerational dividend that we are seeing in Africa, where young people are beginning to see not the shortcomings of the decolonization processes, but the need to continue the fight from political independence onwards. Africa cannot be this mineral rich and yet our people live in abject poverty. We cannot continue to have Belgium as a leading economy, yet it is underwritten by the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and so on and so on. This is what young people in Africa are saying this must end. Unfortunately, some of the means that they are using are unconstitutional and condemnable, such as military coups.
All right. Now, Professor, we know that ECOWAS has responded to the issue in Niger with talks of military intervention, and we understand that there is a possibility of the ECOWAS leadership to convene about the matter later this week. What are some of the outcomes to likely be?
The ultimatum that was imposed on ECOWAS lapsed and it was extended. And that is a clear indication of who blinked first. Because Niger, the military junta was very solid, and they said whoever comes into Niger will be met with firepower. And what did ECOWAS do? It extended its deadline. In political terms, it is conceding that we are seeing that these guys are resolute, and the only thing that we can do is to extend our deadline so that we can give way to more diplomacy and negotiation. And how does the junta reciprocate? They closed the airspace. Now the borders are closed and only open to what they are calling friendly states, and the airspace is closed. They are actually escalating. And Niger is a very strategic country, not only for the United States and France that are partnering in Niger in fighting the insurgents, but also for Africa, because Niger shares borders with 8 countries: Nigeria, Benin, Burkina Faso, Algeria, Libya, Chad, and Mali. And that makes it a very strategic country. But also, to complicate things, there are some other ECOWAS member states that are openly siding with Niger, and they are declaring that if you bring ECOWAS troops into Niger, you will find us there. So Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are actually forming a loose pact. And what we are seeing now is a divided ECOWAS. And what is ECOWAS without these 3 members? Is ECOWAS prepared to go to war with itself? This is a very complicated scenario. In my view, diplomacy is the best way, negotiations are the best way. They must involve France, and they must be very frank about the absence of the democratic dividend and how French companies continue to milk the the resources of Africa and paying a very small amount. Uranium mines what is the word? They are getting resources for a song, and this is making people angry, because with the internet and the information is at the fingertips of young people, and this is what is making this a very complicated problem for ECOWAS.
All right. Now, Professor, as we conclude our conversation this morning, are we likely to see continued post-colonial discourse in Africa?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. It goes without saying that the people of Africa are awake and alive to their resources. We know how rich Namibia is. We know how rich Zimbabwe is. We know how rich South Africa is. And slowly time is coming where Africans are demanding to be treated as equal global citizens. Saddam Hussein said, all we are demanding as people of Iraq is the right to rights. We are tired of being second-class citizens in this world. So this issue that we are seeing in Niger, in West Africa, is most likely going to grow increasingly in West Africa and to the rest of the African continent. And it is partly an extension of the belligerence that is there in continental Europe. The war in Ukraine and the war between Ukraine and Russia has something to do with what is happening in Sudan between those two generals. And definitely, it has got something to do with what is happening in Niger today, especially the fact that there is now an alternative to France. There is now an alternative to the West. So we are slowly seeing the the West being decentered. The West as the center of everything is slowly changing. Even in football terms, Saudi Arabia came in. It is now buying players, and the European soccer leagues are complaining that what is happening? It is because they were used to this hegemonic tendency where you use the US dollar. The US dollar is then politicized and instrumentalized and used as a tool of foreign policy. So we are seeing this decentering, and people in Africa are now demanding real independence, not just political independence, but that which comes with political independence.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks.